They said she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what if the real crime was calling for help? Before a single shot was fired, the cameras were already rolling. GloRilla's home was under siege, and by the end of the night, it wasn't the intruders in handcuffs, it was her. This isn't just a story about injustice, it's a warning. Because if this can happen to her, imagine what they'll do to you. They said it was just another party gone sideways. That GloRilla was simply caught in the wrong moment, in the wrong place. But what they never explained, what they couldn't explain, was why surveillance footage had already started rolling. Before chaos even began, in the dead of night, her home became a battleground. 3 masked men kicked in the door, guns drawn, hunting for anything they could snatch. It wasn't a robbery, it was an ambush. Inside, GloRilla's family panicked, hiding and ducking, unsure if they'd make it out alive. One gunshot tore through the silence. A brutal reminder of how fast safety can disappear. By the time law enforcement arrived, the attackers had vanished into the shadows. No suspects, no trail. Only chopper blades slicing the air overhead and a home filled with paralyzing fear. GloRilla's real name, Gloria Hallelujah Woods, wasn't even in town. Her loved ones did what anyone would do in that moment. They called the police, but what they got wasn't help, it was a nightmare. During their search, deputies claimed they caught the scent of marijuana. And just like that, the narrative flipped. Forget the gunman. Forget the stolen valuables. All eyes turned toward what might be hidden in her closet. That's when things took a dark, almost surreal turn, one that felt more like the plot of a cautionary film than real life. In a world where celebrities often hide behind legal teams, publicists, and carefully crafted statements, GloRilla did something few in her position would ever consider. She didn't run. She didn't release a PR statement begging for privacy. She didn't let the speculation brew or the media concoct its own storyline. Instead, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She walked herself, unaccompanied and unguarded, into the Forsyth County Jail. No flashing cameras. No dramatic music playing in the background. No entourage of lawyers or security shielding her from the public eye. She simply showed up, as if answering for a mistake she hadn't even made. She didn't owe anyone that kind of transparency, but she gave it anyway. Some called it brave. Others called it foolish. But what it really was human. Just a woman caught in the crosshairs of a legal system, more focused on appearances than truth. And then, the reality of the charges became clear and confusing. Despite the violent break-in at her home, despite the fact that armed intruders had terrorized her family, GloRilla wasn't being charged with anything even remotely connected to the burglary. She wasn't accused of helping the suspects. She wasn't suspected of hiding evidence. She wasn't obstructing justice or withholding information. She wasn't even home when it happened. Yet the charge she faced was coldly simple and stunningly disproportionate possession of marijuana. Not pounds, not distribution, not trafficking, just alleged residue reportedly found in a closet inside her bedroom. It sounded so small, so technical, so forgettable until it became the reason she was placed in a jail cell. Suddenly, her name was splashed across headlines. Not as the victim of a terrifying home invasion, but as another celebrity facing drug charges. The story pivoted. The narrative shifted. The trauma of the break-in was pushed aside in favor of sensationalism. The public wasn't being asked to sympathize with a woman whose home had been violently violated. They were being told to scrutinize her for what was allegedly found in her bedroom. And let's be clear, she wasn't even there. She didn't report the burglary herself. Her family, scared, shaken, and doing what any reasonable person would do, had called the police for help. They expected protection, support, maybe even justice. What they got was a legal process that twisted a cry for help into an excuse for prosecution. Somehow, GloRilla had become the accused. Not because she witnessed the crime. Not because she participated in it. But simply because she was the homeowner. Her absence didn't shield her. In fact, it did the opposite. It allowed the narrative to be written without her. And when she returned to claim her voice, the damage had already taken root. She had to trade music studios for courtrooms, interviews for arraignments, beats for bail paperwork. Though she posted bond with little delays thanks to her resources and legal support, the real cost wasn't financial, it was reputational. It was emotional. It was cultural. Because what this moment revealed wasn't just about GloRilla, it was about a system where victims could still be cuffed, processed, and humiliated. Her mugshot made the rounds online. Memes emerged. Late-night jokes were whispered. But underneath all the noise was a deep, gut-wrenching question. How did the woman whose home had been invaded end up in handcuffs? The fans were shocked. Outrage bubbled up online. Social media didn't just react, it exploded. Comment sections were flooded with disbelief. Tweets called out the injustice. Hashtags trended within hours. Justice for GloRilla became more than just a catchy was a digital rally cry. People demanded to know why no suspects had been arrested. Why no one was talking about the actual criminals. Why the narrative had turned so sharply away from the horror of the break-in and landed squarely on the shoulders of a woman who was supposed to be protected by the very system now prosecuting her. Community leaders started speaking out. Celebrities tweeted in support. Activists pointed to GloRilla's arrest as yet another example of how Black women, even in moments of vulnerability, are met with criminalization rather than compassion. That marijuana, especially when associated with a high-profile figure, becomes a weapon of convenience for the justice system, used not because it reflects a threat to public safety, but because it provides a legal foothold for further scrutiny, detainment, and narrative control. And let's not forget the broader implications. What happened to GloRilla signaled something terrifying to every homeowner. Every woman, every Black person who's ever thought about calling the police. If reporting a crime can backfire this dramatically, what's the incentive to speak up? What kind of chilling effect does this create for future victims? When your trauma becomes your liability, silence starts to feel safer than truth. And that's not justice, that's fear-driven compliance. The situation exposed more than a legal contradiction. It revealed a systemic flaw. It brought forward the uncomfortable conversation about who gets treated like a victim and who gets treated like a suspect. It called into question the priorities of law enforcement. Are they here to protect or to prosecute based on proximity and profile? GloRilla's experience wasn't an isolated error. It was a reflection of patterns that too often see Black women stripped of context, of nuance, of the benefit of the doubt. The marijuana charge, minor as it may seem on paper, acted like a smokescreen. It allowed the real story, the terrifying break-in, the 3 masked intruders, the gun fired, the trauma endured to slip quietly into the background. That's how narratives are controlled. That's how victims get erased. And that's how institutions absolve themselves without ever solving the actual problem. So while the legal process will likely play out in courtrooms, the cultural verdict has already been issued on. It's damning. GloRilla's case became a flashpoint, a mirror, and a movement all at once. It's about her, yes, but it's also about us. About what we allow, what we normalize, and what we're willing to question. Because if someone as visible, vocal, and resourceful as GloRilla can be transformed from survivor to suspect in the blink of a headline, then none of us are truly safe from the same fate. What started as concern turned into heartbreak. This wasn't justice, it was betrayal. The same system meant to protect her had spun her into the villain, while the actual criminals walked free. GloRilla's legal team, Drew Finneling and Marissa Goldberg, refused to stand by quietly. Seasoned, high-profile attorneys with a national reputation, they called the arrest exactly what it was: an abuse of power. Their words cut deep, painting a bleak image of how law enforcement had completely lost sight of what mattered. They didn't just defend her, they exposed a broken system. They clarified that GloRilla wasn't even informed about the break-in until after it happened. Her family, shaken by the violence, had simply sought protection. But instead of chasing leads or collecting evidence, officers secured a search warrant based solely on a smell. No bullets recovered. No stolen property logged, just weed on suddenly. That's all the story became. Finneling and Goldberg didn't mince words. They said plainly, GloRilla was being penalized for being a target. That law enforcement had gotten so twisted in their priorities, they missed the real danger. Meanwhile, her traumatized family sat in a ransacked house while investigators were knee-deep in her personal belongings. No arrests for the intruders. No accountability for the armed assault. And that silence from authorities. Deafening. That's when a voice of reason emerged. Georgia State Representative Eric Bell decided enough was enough. As public outcry surged, he didn't hide behind statements, he spoke truth to power. The Democrat from Jonesboro broke it down with no filters. No person, regardless of who they are or where they live, should fear being punished for asking for help. His words lit a fire. This wasn't just about GloRilla anymore. It became a symbol of a much deeper issue. How often victims of crime, particularly Black victims, become the ones scrutinized. Bell wasn't just angry, he was mobilized. GloRilla's case, to him, wasn't a glitch, it was a warning, a reflection of a justice system that punishes the most vulnerable while protecting those with the power to spin a narrative. So he got to work. He introduced House Bill 464, a proposal aimed directly at preventing what happened to GloRilla from happening again. The bill didn't just have emotion behind it, it had purpose. Bell's vision was clear. Too many times, victims end up arrested because they dared to pick up the phone. Especially in marginalized communities, that risk can be deadly. His proposed legislation demanded a shift away from punitive reactions and toward sensible justice. It wasn't about letting people off the hook, it was about not turning victims into criminals for unrelated technicalities. Because let's be honest, nobody should have to weigh the risk of being jailed against their right to feel safe. And the public listened. Support for the bill surged. Suddenly, lawmakers on both sides began to pay attention. House Bill 464 wasn't flashy, but it was necessary. It passed a major committee hurdle, the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, a sign that momentum was real. What started with GloRilla turned into a bipartisan wake-up call. One that said loud and clear, the system is failing those it should protect. And if it could happen to her, it could happen to any of us. HB 464 is still winding its way through the legislative halls, but its momentum is undeniable. Representative Bell is pressing forward with urgency, and he's not alone. Yet as lawmakers debate change, one chilling fact looms large. The men who stormed GloRilla's home still walk free. It's the question echoing in whispers, but rarely said aloud by those in power. Why haven't the actual criminals been caught? This wasn't a petty theft. It was a violent invasion, carried out by armed intruders who traumatized an entire family and vanished without consequence. One fired a gun. That alone should have triggered a massive manhunt. Instead, it led to a search warrant not for the suspects, but for the homeowner's bedroom closet. Allegedly due to the faint scent of marijuana. That moment shifted the spotlight. The narrative became less about justice and more about judgment. Police brought in K9 units, drones, and filled the neighborhood with flashing lights. But all that effort didn't result in arrests or evidence recovery. It resulted in GloRilla, who wasn't even present, becoming the only person charged. No names have been released. No suspects apprehended. It's a silence that speaks volumes. And it raises a painful question. Since when did marijuana become more threatening than masked men with weapons? Public frustration is building. Why are victims being treated like offenders? How many other stories have quietly disappeared, buried under official indifference? What happened in GloRilla's home exposed a jarring truth. Our justice system doesn't always prioritize justice. It often chooses optics. And in this case, those optics came at the cost of her freedom, her dignity, and her safety. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the media dug deeper, not into the burglary but into GloRilla's past. Headlines resurfaced a DUI charge from April 2024. She'd been pulled over after making a U-turn at a red light and faced several traffic violations. A misstep, sure, but completely unrelated to the traumatic event at her home. Still, it was thrown back into the spotlight as if to justify the system's treatment of her. This isn't a new playbook. When Black women, especially those in the public eye, are arrested, their past is unearthed and weaponized. The system, and society, lean into narratives that paint them as deserving of harsh treatment. So instead of asking why a victim ended up in handcuffs, the focus shifts to whether she earned it. One bad headline snowballs into a smear campaign. And that's how justice gets buried. The violent break-in, the fear, the unanswered questions, all pushed aside for clickbait. GloRilla wasn't just defending herself legally, she was fighting to preserve her humanity. Through it all, her legal team stood firm. And Representative Bell continued to speak truth to power. Because this wasn't just about one woman's record, it was about a justice system failing its most basic duty. The core issue couldn't be clearer. A woman was arrested for marijuana possession in the aftermath of a home invasion she wasn't present for. Meanwhile, the armed intruders remain unidentified. This isn't just a lapse in judgment. It's a warning to victims everywhere, calling the police could turn you from survivor to suspect. That's the cycle House Bill 464 aims to break. It's not just a legislative response, it's a framework for change. A promise to victims that their voices won't be punished. That their pleas for help won't lead to mugshots. Because when asking for protection results in prosecution, the system isn't flawed, it's inverted. GloRilla's case struck a nerve, not just because she's famous, but because it's relatable. Countless victims fear arrest more than their attackers, and those who speak out risk becoming cautionary tales. Meanwhile, the true criminals vanish into silence. No justice, no closure, just shadows. So this story isn't just about GloRilla. It's about a system that must answer for its failures. About every person told, "Call us if you're in danger," only to be met with cuffs and court dates. The real question isn't whether her charges will be dropped, it's how many more will be charged. While seeking help, if this story rattled you, it should. Because GloRilla's experience isn't rare, it's routine. If someone with visibility, legal counsel, and media attention can still be dragged through the mud for surviving, imagine what happens to those without any of that. This isn't just injustice, it's terror disguised as procedure. This can't be another headline you scroll past. It's a call to action. Whether you've lived something similar or are simply outraged, don't stay quiet. Comment, share, raise your voice. Because real change doesn't start in courtrooms, it starts with people refusing to look away. When we choose silence, we allow the system to function unchecked. Every time a victim becomes the accused, it chips away at the public's trust. GloRilla's case represents more than one woman caught in legal crosshairs. It's a mirror reflecting how distorted justice becomes when bias, fear, and outdated laws take center stage. It forces us to ask deeper questions. Why are victims of home invasions being criminalized while their perpetrators evade accountability? Why is personal marijuana possession still being used as a tool to punish and shame, especially when it holds no relevance to the original crime? This isn't about celebrity, fame, or clicks. This is about survival, dignity, the right to feel safe in your own home without worrying that the law might turn against you for simply existing in the wrong skin. At the wrong time. GloRilla didn't resist. She didn't run. She didn't try to fight the process. She showed up alone, quietly. That act of bravery should have been commended. Instead, it was twisted into a spectacle of guilt. This should make us all uncomfortable, because if someone with resources, influence, and legal counsel can still be treated like a suspect instead of a survivor, what does that say for everyday people without those safety nets? It tells us the problem is systemic. It's embedded in the paperwork, in the assumptions, in the outdated policies that continue to prioritize punishment over protection. Should victims face prosecution for seeking protection? Absolutely not. Should GloRilla's charges be dropped? Without question. More importantly, should laws like House Bill 464, which shields individuals from prosecution when evidence is found after a reported crime, become the national standard? Yes, because that law doesn't just help GloRilla, it protects every mother, daughter, brother, and neighbor who's ever feared being re-victimized by a justice system that doesn't always recognize the difference between evidence and entrapment. This isn't just about one night. It's about every life derailed by silence, and every truth drowned out by the noise. It's about every young person who watched this unfold and thought, maybe it's safer to say nothing at all. That's the real tragedy, that our systems train people to stay quiet for fear of retaliation instead of empowering them to seek help, and as long as those responsible remain free, our work isn't done. Not until the system starts recognizing victims as people worth protecting. Not until walking into a police station is seen as courage, not as a confession. Not until the headlines shift from shaming the harmed to holding the real wrongdoers accountable. Because justice isn't justice until it's truly fair and right. Now, it's anything but.